for me, the biggest lesson I've learned, it's not even a lesson, it's just a continual progression of confidence and self-esteem that I've needed, and it's just grown my business and everything that I do. And it's the law of attraction. You put it out there and it's all going to come to you.
Adam, hello. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you on. It was absolutely amazing to spend time with you in New York City and to be on your show last week. I have been looking forward to this show all month long, so thank you so much for joining.
Likewise. I mean, I really don't hear too many people say that they're looking forward for a full month to doing anything with me, but I appreciate that, Stephynie, and I'm excited to be here and introduce myself to your audience and see where this conversation is going to go today.
Awesome. So, Adam, I want to start at the beginning. I want to talk about where you grew up, and I want to talk about how you grew up, and just kind of give our audience just a little foundation of who you were growing up and how much trouble you got into.
I was a punk. I was definitely a punk, and it's funny now, and I'm sure you could attest to this. It's not until you have kids that you could actually see yourself through their eyes, and you're like, holy shit, my 9-year-old daughter, thank God she looks like my wife. My daughter is absolutely stunning. She's a specimen. She's a creature. But she acts like me all the time. She does the dumbest shit. She says the dumbest things. She fumbles on a lie. She tries to do things. I'm like, that's me. I mean, she literally does my mannerisms. And I look at her sometimes and I'm like, oh, I got to yell at her. But at the same time, I'm like, no, good job. Keep doing it. It's like, so, born and raised in Brooklyn, Sheepshead Bay, South Brooklyn, and it's interesting too because I always say that you ever remember, you're born in Brooklyn, yeah, and then when did you move? And they're like, I was born in the hospital, and then we moved when I was 3 months. I'm like, that doesn't count. No, we were there till I was 12, which was interesting. So, Brooklyn was cool. Brooklyn was interesting because I think growing up in such a mixed community, I think it really builds a foundation of acceptance. Because you're in a school with so many different people that, you're not shocked. Like, oh my God, there's a black kid, an Indian kid, an Asian kid. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, they're all kids in your class. And I think looking back on it now, 40 plus years later, you're like, oh, thank God I had that experience, that I grew up in Brooklyn, that I got to experience, that kind of life. Both my parents in New York City Board of Ed teachers, retired at 30 plus years. And, that was another pretty cool thing too, because they were extremely supportive with my education, my brother's education, and just loving. My parents are hippies, My mom's at Woodstock, They're just loving. They're the nicest people in the world. No drama, no BS. Just really great parents. And I look at the way they raised my brother and I, and that's the way I raise my kids, just with such love and care and fun and silly voices and all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm pretty thankful. For that experience.
So we have experienced so much of that moving from San Francisco to North Carolina. My kids grew up in, just like you said, very, very mixed, Indian, Asian, African American, and it wasn't even nobody talked about it. It was just very normal for them. And then we got to North Carolina, and it's been very, let's say, it's been a very interesting experience. And it's been a very educational experience because we've been able to really talk about differences and understanding how other people see things and, being a product of your environment. Perspective. Yeah, perspective. Exactly.
Perspective, for sure. And there was another really interesting thing, too, because I went to, apparently, this is going to sound crazy, and I don't really talk about it. I have, apparently, and I don't know my score, apparently, my IQ when I was younger was pretty high. And it's definitely not even close to that right now. I'm a freaking idiot, and I burnt many, many brain cells along the way. And I would say it's probably half-life, right? If IQs could have a radioactive half-life, I am definitely the effect of that. But I got into a special elementary school in a special program called the ASTA program. It's like the gifted program, right? Which I accelerated at, but at the same time, I was also a wise ass. I was a punk in elementary school.
I'm so shocked.
The joker. I was a joker.
I'm stunned.
I was the joker. I did the silly pranks, and I did some really shitty pranks too. You know, I did some bad things, which I've never talked about on the podcast. I put a girl's finger in a Snoopy pencil sharpener. I tried to sharpen her finger. And we know what happened when that, you know.
And so what happened? So were you the bully or were you bullied?
Not a bully. Not a bully.
I was
just
a jerk.
From a bully.
just
I was just
a jerk.
I was just trying to be funny. Right? And
Wow.
and I the same girl, I think a year later, I again trying to be funny, I pulled the chair out from her when she was trying to sit down. And those are things I look back on. I'm like, shit, I really regret that. I was a jerk, you know.
Have you reached out to her on Facebook and apologized?
The funny thing is, I think I did a few years ago once Facebook came around, because all the kids from elementary school that you haven't seen, everyone got reconnected on Facebook, and I think so. I'm gonna have to go back and see if Facebook kind of keeps those messages, if I go into her name. But I do apologize. And kids do stupid shit in elementary school. You're learning to be who you are, and some lessons are hard, some are easy, but you go through that. But my parents did something that was so amazing, but it kind of impacted me and my brother. They said, we want to have a better life for you. Your brother, you're 12, your brother's 10. You can't be sharing a room. We don't want you going to the high schools here in New York City. And they wanted a better life for us, and they moved out to the burbs, to actually the town I live in now, in Merrick. And that was a big culture shock. I moved in the middle of 7th grade, and that was really tough because you have all the elementary schools in the area that are separate. There's 5 elementary schools, but then all the kids come together for 6th and 7th grade before they go to high school. No, 7th and 8th grade, and then 9th and 10th in high school. And it was just crazy. I came in and, I was a new kid, and they thought I was from Brooklyn and tough. I'm like, I'm not a tough kid. I'm just a little Jewish kid from Brooklyn, I'm
a scrappy kid. I'm a scrappy kid.
Yeah, and it was tough. It was tough to come in and try to find friends and find your voice and be yourself. And, you're 12, 13 years old, and your body's going through changes, and you're going through changes. And that was tough. That was a tough transition for me. But I found my groove. I found my niche. I found my tribe. And, that was interesting. And I love living in the burbs. We had a good time out here. And now I live here. I mean, it's my town. It's my home. And it called us back because it's comfortable and it's great. And, we built our life here.
Amazing. Amazing. So you ended up going to the University of Buffalo, but it wasn't your first choice.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
What podcast did you listen to where I said that?
I didn't listen to any podcast that you listened ever.
But you had to know it wasn't my first choice.
I did. I had to know.
Who did I talk about that with? I had that conversation recently. I don't know, but great research on that one. So, yeah, this is actually a great decision that I made because I wanted to go to University of Maryland. I went to visit a friend who was a year older. I had a great time there. And, I went to summer camp for many, many years. And I always kind of looked up to the older counselors who were in college, and they'd be rocking their Maryland, their Delaware, their UMass kind of shirts. They're going away to school, and you're hearing stories of their fraternities and all the parties and everything. And I always had this dream about going to one of those cool schools. And I went down to Maryland, and it was awesome, and I applied. And I got into the honors program, not the presidential program. The presidential program would have been a full-ride scholarship. Honors program was partial, and it was still stupid expensive. And my parents said, listen, we could send you here to Maryland, but it's going to literally bankrupt us. Or you could go to University of Buffalo, which was perfectly cool and awesome, and we'll be able to help you out. It's a lot more affordable. Listen, they're teachers, they're not, made of money, which is crazy because I look at them now and they're living the best life. Pension, going on trips. They're literally living their best life right now. Thank God. Anyway, so I decided to go to University of Buffalo, and as I say, it was the best 5 years of my life up there, and the people, the community are just awesome up there. I didn't even mind the snow. It was fun. It was crazy. There was one time we almost got snowed in for Thanksgiving. Actually, we did. There was literally 6 feet of snow in a 36-hour period. I mean, if you can imagine, and people see, literally, we were sliding off the roofs, we were doing some dumb stuff there. But I immersed myself in the community up there. I worked for the Buffalo Sabres for a couple of years, which was an incredible internship. Really got embedded with the community. I dated a Buffalo Jill cheerleader for a little bit, which was kind of fun. I also worked at the mall up there, which if you ever want to really get a good sense of how people are, work at the mall. Sit in the food court and just observe. Brilliant. Yes, it was a baseball card store. Memorabilia. I forgot the name of it. It's going to come to me later. I forgot the name of it, but I worked in a baseball card store. My buddy James worked in the store next door, which was a bonsai store. So he sold the bonsais, and I sold the baseball cards. And on quiet days, we would just kind of both stand outside of our respective stores. And he didn't drive, so he had the same schedule as me. I drive him to the mall, and we were just mall buddies. And it was just it was a trip. It was a trip working in that mall. We saw some funny shit.
So at this point, you're 18, 19, 20, you're in college. Mm-hmm. What was your biggest rejection or your biggest obstacle at that point? Right then, what was the biggest thing you had gone through?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing for me was I almost got kicked out. So I got accepted to University of Buffalo's 5-year MBA program, business school, which would have set me up nicely. And I failed out of it. I failed calculus. I failed a couple of classes. My freshman year, I was partying, pledging a fraternity, and that was real disappointment. That was a tough one. And my parents threatened to pull me out if I didn't shape up. But I did get kicked out of the business school.
Wow.
Which sucked. It really sucked. And
what did they say to you, Adam? When you got kicked out and you had to make that call, what did they say?
They were just disappointed. I think that was I think the first real time, the first time I really disappointed my parents, and I felt it. And I really vowed to never do that again. And obviously little disappointments here and there. I mean, we're young. We're in our 20s, late teens, 20s. We're growing. We're becoming adults. We're learning how to live on our own. We're learning how to take accountability, take responsibility, which we'll dig into later, I'm sure. But that was the first time where I was like, shit, I gotta get my act together. And I did. I pulled it together. I got the grades up, and I ended up staying at University of Buffalo. I needed an extra semester. We called it the bonus year, the 5th year. We called it the bonus year. And I finished in 4.5, but I ended up staying for the full 5 because I was working for the Sabres, and it was great. I mean, we had such a good time up there. And when I came home in the summers, I did a couple of cool things. I had some great internships, working at Gray Advertising, which really gave me that first taste into the ad world. And I also spent a couple of summers working as a cabana boy in the beach club, which taught me the real entrepreneurial spirit of the hustle. Because if anybody doesn't know about a beach club here on Long Island or anywhere, as a cabana boy, you're essentially a waiter, a busboy. You're taking their chairs down to the beach. You're really taking care of everything. But what you're also doing is you're floating your guests' money. So they'll order food, and you'll run up a tab, and at the end of the week, you give them the bill, and then they tip on top of that, right? So you have to manage cash flow, and there's all these little side hustles that go on there. So we had these little side hustles going on with the girls that work the register, where sometimes they just wouldn't, add something up. They wouldn't include something there, right? There was a whole system. It was literally like when you see like the Goodfellas movies, the scams that we had there. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot about how to hustle. You learn a lot about customer service, right? You learn like the schmooze, right? You got to schmooze some of these older ladies. Some of them were real milfy. I'm telling you, it was a good time.
It's so funny, Adam. It's so funny because I know yours are not as old. I know your oldest is 9.5. My oldest will be 27 next month. And then I have a 25-year-old and a 20-year-old and a 12-year-old. And when I tell them stories of this hustle, so when I tell them stories about the system within the workings of whatever, like, sports camp or like things like that, just that they're literally like, you did that, Mom? Oh. They're just so offended.
There were so many side hustles that went on.
So many hustles.
And there was a couple of cabana boys that were, doing some things on the side with some of the guests. It was
full service, man.
Oh, there was some full service going on at this beach club. It was a good time. And then the first time I was there, I was working the door. I was doing like the tickets and checking the passes and the scams that we have with the guest passes and everything. So there was a point where, you come home on a Sunday night and I'd be wearing my khakis with my cargo shorts, right? I'd come home and I'd literally, go into my room and I'd turn my pockets inside out and just cash would fall out. And there was times I was making more money back then than I was in my 20s and 30s.
Right, for sure.
Even 40s, right? And then on Sunday nights, we had off on Monday. Sunday nights, we'd literally get in the car from the beach club and go down to Atlantic City with our fake IDs, chalked IDs, and I'll leave it at that. Anyway, those were the early days of the Poz. Yep.
So, Adam, let's fast forward a bit. Let's talk about working at VaynerMedia.
I want to go back to the beach club because I really never talk about it. I'm kidding.
You're like, back to the beach club.
You wanted exclusive. I never talked about the beach club days on a podcast. There's so much good stuff there.
I mean, the beach club, just so you know, I literally have 30 questions going through my head. I'm like, I want to know this. I want to know this. I want to know this. We'll come back to that.
And I finally just last year got rid of my last cut-off Sands Atlantic t-shirt.
Did you get rid of it or did Alona get rid of it?
No, I got rid of it. I mean, it was 20 plus years old that I've had this cut off like frayed like from a scissor, not like a nice cut off.
Right, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Not a proper cut off.
I think my husband got rid of a whole bunch of those shirts because he's like, this is a guy's shirt. I bet you slept in this shirt. This is a guy's shirt. I bet you slept in this shirt.
Yeah.
I was like,
gotta go.
That's actually really not what happened, but you go ahead and with that whole theory yourself.
Yeah.
Back to Vayner.
No, we did that. We did it early on in our relationship too. My wife now had a couple of shirts. I'm like, I don't want to see that shirt anymore. I know that's not your shirt, and I get it. We've all had relationships in our past, but I pretend I don't want to. I just no, out of sight, out of mind. Yep.
That's so funny. I love it. So you worked for VaynerMedia before you were fired 7 months after working there. Wah, wah, wah. What did Gary say to you when he brought you into the office?
Yeah, that was a fun day. So it was on April 1st, 2015, and so April Fool's Day to me is always like I call it my Vaynerversary, right? And it was actually the best and worst day of my life on my professional life, right? Like I look back on it, and that day was obviously terrible, but I knew it was coming. And, I look back on it now, I'm like, thank God that happened, because that was a pivotal moment in my life and my career where I really, took ownership. So that Gary and I always, when I was lucky, because back then Gary was much more hands-on in the business, in the day-to-day business. And I did a decent amount of work with him, right? We did new business pitches, a couple of accounts that he dipped in on. So we had a rapport, we had a relationship. I had the opportunity to go to biz pitches with him, and that was incredible to watch him operate in that kind of environment. The early conversations of building out Hudson Yards. I was in rooms with Ross. I'm blanking on his name. The Miami Dolphins guy, the owner. But the day I got let go, listen, there was a couple of conversations that preceded that moment, and anybody who gets fired for performance, if you don't know it's coming, something's wrong with you. In very, very few cases, you're like, oh my God, why did I get fired? Now, of course, it's outliers. People get fired for stupid reasons. But if it's for performance and it's real and it's in fact, actual correct, you did not do your job, you did something wrong, you affected the business, it shouldn't come as a surprise, right? So when I got fired, of course, it hit home, but it did not come as a surprise. So the HR folks, they gave me the news, and I was like, all right, yep. Not the first time, but this one definitely hurts, because I really thought I had the opportunity for Vayner to really be my forever job, that I thought. Grass is greener. And, I sat with Gary, and, I've said this a million times. There was a lot of really personal conversation that we had. We talked about life, what's next. But then we started to talk about, he was asking me, he's like, do you see yourself, doing this? Do you like this? Do you enjoy this? All these questions going on in my head. Literally the minute I just got let go, and I'm just, things are spinning around in my head. I'm like,
right.
All I was thinking about was, how the hell am I going to tell my wife when I walk out of here? That's all I was thinking about, disappointing her. I could deal with my own fuck-ups, right? I'll figure this out. But we just bought a house, literally. Our expenses were out the wazoo, and it was all this shit going through my head. And he said to me, he goes, listen, what you need to do when you leave here, you need to stop focusing on the things that you suck at and double down on your strengths. And I thought about that for a moment, because everyone in your whole life is always telling you, work on that, get better. You're not good at math, work on this. Instead of like, all right, well, maybe you're not good at math, but you're great at science. So why don't you really focus on putting that energy towards the science? But that's when things started to click. And we spoke about what I'm good at, relationships.
Right.
And he's like, have you given any thought to anything outside of, account management and strategy? I was like, well, listen, I have a buddy that does, HR, finance recruiting and healthcare recruiting. And I looked at him, and I remember it was like, and he said to me, and he talks about this too when he was on my show. He's like, I knew it. He's like, I knew you would be a great recruiter. I knew it would be a great move for you. And I followed that through. So you got, I'm sorry, I'm going to dig more into this, because I can't see you having any issues with performance. That's shocking to me. You were literally like on it. You were literally like, you don't sugarcoat anything. You're like, this needs to change. This needs to change. Do this. Do this. I was not anywhere close to who I am now.
Amazing.
Than I was 6.5 years ago. I was very different. I was insecure about my qualifications. I also did not handle some interpersonal relationships in the office well.
Now I can see that.
Vayner was a very young agency, and it was kind of a Lord of the Flies kind of situation there. And anyone who's in account management, if you're in the ad world and you get hired in a new company, usually they're going to put you on an account. You're going to manage this account. You're going to manage this Pepsi account. What happened was, when I came in, and Claude at the time there was not head of people. She was
advertising
senior account leader. Yeah. Who was literally, she really helped me on the way out too, which I love her for, and I talked about that a couple of times. But I didn't handle interpersonal relationships. They put me on an account where there was someone underneath me and there was someone above me, and I was basically coming in and they thought I was a threat to them. And I didn't handle that well. I didn't elevate it. I tried to handle it on my own, and it literally snowballed into a fucking disaster. Like, literally, I was mean girled over there.
Wow.
And if I fast forward now, if that happened to me now, I'm not taking that shit from anybody.
Right. Well, and there's also, too, a lot more exposure. You know how to handle it.
Correct.
You have the experience of being, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's have the conversation.
No, and they were like, it was literally like high school.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Like, they blocked me out of meetings. It was just terrible. It was just shitty. And it just snowballed. And it was really, you know, so Gary even said, he's like, listen, he's like, it's not because we don't like you. I mean, those two people didn't like me, but the rest of the people did. And the other hard part was, you know, I was thrown into some really tricky situations. You know, there was one time where, you know, I got thrown on, you know, one of our big clients, you know, came to us and they wanted to activate a huge multi-million-dollar thing for South by Southwest, literally like 10 weeks before the event. And I got thrown on top of it, and I didn't get the creative support. I didn't get the strategy support. We finally pulled something together, and it was fine, but it wasn't up to standards, and they weren't happy with it, and someone had to go, and that was me. And I just got put in shitty situations, and it wasn't meant to be. It was not meant to be.
So what did you do next? So you leave, and obviously you're feeling absolute crap. What do you do next?
On that day, or just in the
Both.
sequence of my life?
But
well, yeah. So it was
both.
terrible. I remember walking outside. It was freezing cold, and it was snowing that day. It was late. You know, it was flurrying and it was freezing. And you know, it was Park Avenue. And my wife worked only 5 blocks up north at her law firm that she was at the time. And I walked outside and I called her, and I'm like, April Fools. She's like, what do you mean? I got fired. She's like, no, really? She's like, oh. And it was like, you know, 10:30, 10:45 in the morning. She's like, well, why don't you just come up to my office? Just walk over here. I was like, I got to stop to make. She's like, what, you going to the bar? And there was this bar, like literally the traditional New York City Irish pub that's on like every block. And it's like 10:45 in the morning, and I walk in, and literally it's like 3 old men at the bar. And I was like, oh shit, this is so cliche, right? And I sat there and I, you know, had my whiskey and, you know, made a couple of text messages and phone calls. And then I walked up to her, you know, office and shut her door, and I just cried. I just remember crying because I didn't know what was next. I felt like such a disappointment. I was so excited about this opportunity at Vayner that I worked so hard for, Stephynie, that I was so proud of, that I bragged about to everybody. And this is before Gary was a household name to anyone outside of social and digital. And I didn't know what to do. And she just, you know, held me and hugged me and said, just go home and we'll figure this out.
I love that. She is such a rock star,
yeah,
and she is such a class act.
She is, and I, you know, I count my lucky stars every day for her. But the next few weeks were tough because it was a moment of actualization where, okay, I'm 35. What am I doing in my career? Like, I have to support my family. That's not even an option.
Right.
I'm not going to be a freeloader. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to rely on her. And I've been through this a couple of times early on in my career with her when we were together, where we lost an account, like 20 people got let go at a firm. And so we've been through this before, but this time was different.
It was personal.
She knew it was personal, and I had to make a change.
Right.
And we spoke a lot about recruiting. And, you know, luckily for me, I had some great recruiters that I've worked with in the past, and some of them I'm deeply connected with now. And they gave me a lot of their time and really worked with me on understanding what it meant to work in recruiting, the ups and downs. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And luckily for me, I aligned with a great firm called Onward Search, that it wasn't a smile and dial, million phone calls, metrics kind of place. It was, they knew that I was coming to the table with my skill set of being able to foster and develop relationships. And I was also coming with 15 years of working in the ad industry, and I was going to recruit for marketing and advertising roles. So you didn't have to train me on how to recruit an account manager or a creative director, because I knew it inside and out, but also because of my Rolodex. Right? And
you bring the book. When you bring the book and the relationship, that's, you know, everything.
And I hit the ground running, you know, rookie of the year my first year, and I just crushed it, and I knew it was right for me, and I knew it was the right thing, and I haven't looked back.
So now tell me about, you founded your own company.
I did.
What was that like as being a first-time founder? Because you know, so Adam, let me caveat this, okay? First time founder is super, super, super hard. It is impossible. It is difficult. It is painful, okay?
Painful.
But a first-time founder for a recruiting agency, and standout and key differentiators and every single thing that you are, what was your vision? How did you do it? What happened?
So it was interesting. So at that point, you know, when I went on my own, I was only recruiting for little about 2 years, right? So by any traditional standards, to go out on your own with only 2 years experience in anything is risky. But I didn't look at it as 2 years. I looked at it as 2 years in recruiting, but also 15 years of in-market experience with the win at my sale, behind my sale. Mm-hmm. And I went all in. And it was another conversation I had with my wife. I didn't like the second firm I was at. It just wasn't the right place for me. And I was complaining about it. And she's like, why can't you do this on your own? You're giving half your money to the house, half your commissions to the house. What the hell are you getting for that? You're going into the city every day. You're spending money on this. What, to just go sit in an office? There's no one there supporting you. What are you doing? I was like, well, I could do this. And that was it. And the next day, August 30th, 2017, got my LLC done. And there she is. There she is. NHP. Those are my daughter's initials right there. Nina Harrison Posner. That's NHP Talent Group. And, it started in what is now my son's room, right? In our house. And the key differentiator I knew is I wanted to emulate all the great recruiters that I've worked with personally and make sure I didn't do anything that all the shitty recruiters that I've worked with too, the negative experiences from interviewing, and bring that level of account management. Because one thing I was really good at, maybe I faltered sometimes in the digital strategy part, some of the future thinking around executing and digital strategy. But the one thing that I always did well was manage clients. And that's because in my first job ever at the food group, my boss, Karen Wertheim, really instilled in me the concept of client management. Under promise, over deliver, manage expectations.
Yes.
Golden standard, something that I built the foundation of my career on. And I instill it to Kevin, who works with me, just over communicate, right? Like just stay on top of your shit. Like really be mindful about what you say, what you write. And I've worked with Kevin on this where he would just say too much in an email. Like, dude, what the hell are you doing, bro? Right, under promise.
Yes. If
you know something is going to be ready for Monday, say you'll have it for them Tuesday. And like just basic one-on-one shit that makes such a difference in the relationship, right? And we're not lying to clients at all, but we're just managing expectations.
That's exactly right. Okay.
Mindset.
So I have a few questions. I want to go through this with you because when I look at your overall experience and I see how connected you are, I mean, you and I hit it off immediately. You do so many things differently. Okay, there's so many things. We've talked about this before, Adam. I ran a management consulting firm for 16 and a half years. It was a global firm, up to 636 employees, 1% turnover. I hire very, very differently, but I had to gain that confidence within me. I had to go, because I would first look at the Stanford graduate and look at how beautiful the resume was. And I'd be like, this will work. This is great. And every single one of those type employees, I shouldn't say every one of them, but a majority of them ended up in a disaster or a huge managerial issue. And so I have a few questions. So experience or education?
Experience all day long. And it's a little funny kind of side note on that. When I was at American Express, which was one of my least favorite jobs ever, but I learned so much during that time. I hated it there. I hated it every moment, but amazing company, amazing benefits, training. But the one thing I really learned, well, two things. Well, one, I learned process and procedure, but I also learned what I didn't like, which was the financial side of what I had to do. But looking back on it in 10 years since Amex, thank God, because I need that experience to P&L for my business now. So it all comes back around. But the second day that I was there and I got introduced to my team and the people there, the first question they asked me, Stephynie, was not where you coming from, what company. They asked me what B school I went to.
Yeah.
And I was like, B school? I went to University of Buffalo. That's a B school. And their eyes would roll like, what? Is he trying to make a joke? And they would just be so pissed. I could see it in their eyes. Like, wait a minute. This guy has the same job as me.
Yeah.
Probably making a little bit more because I know they just hired him and I've just been promoted in here. And he went to fucking SUNY Buffalo?
Yeah.
Without a grad school? Oh my God.
And,
what the
whole
travesty.
Right. And the whole way their whole entire body changes. Like it was just like
body
just
language.
So
Awful.
dismissive. Like, ugh. And then they would just, I totally hear you. Okay. So experience all day long. Okay.
All day long.
Tell me about how do you calculate risk? So you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're talking to the candidate on the phone and you're having the conversation and you're like, they could be a really good fit. And this has been open for a really long time. How do you walk through calculating the risk?
It's interesting too, because there's a couple things you need to know. And I've been in those shoes before. Some people are really good interviewers. Some people are not. Because I was a great interviewer, even though I sucked at certain jobs. I would come in and I would charm the shit out of anybody. I knew what to say. I knew how to tell my story, very strong, extroverted ability to do that. So I know how to smell bullshit. And I smell bullshit through my spidey sense of being a bullshitter. But I also know what questions to ask about certain jobs because I've been in them before to really sense if this person knows what the hell they're doing, right? So I want to sense, what did you do? What did you do? Not what the team did, But what did you accomplish? What did you actually do? Give me quantifiable results there too. So I'll be listening to a spiel. I'll be listening to a candidate. They're kind of smooth there. And then I'll come in with the real questions. That's why I kind of sense it out. But risk, I never want to put an unqualified candidate in front of a client because that's just not the quality control isn't there. Ultimately, that's what they're paying me for, to be that filter. We are the filter. Sometimes I'll miss though. Sometimes I'll miss both ways. Sometimes I'll put a great candidate through that I think is great. That's terrible. And sometimes I'll pass on a candidate that was probably great for the role, but we're humans, we're fallible, right? Like we can't be perfect all the time. But I would say, pretty high percentile that any candidate I'm putting through is going to be worth at least a conversation with the client. Now, there are candidates that I see that maybe not spot on experience-wise, but I sense something, and I sense an aptitude, an energy, a desire, a passion, which you cannot teach.
Do you say that? Do you say that when you're presenting him forward?
Yeah, always.
So when I had the management consulting firm, when I was just starting out, before I had a huge support team, okay, I would literally call and I would go, Adam, look, they're 75% of everything that you want, but they're 150% of the things that you didn't ask for. I really, really think you should give this guy a shot. Do you say that?
I say it all the time, and 9 out of 10 times my client will take that phone call because they trust me.
Yeah.
But then there's also times when they're like, Adam, the role. It's a very technical role. Say it's like a performance marketing and media role where they need to know Facebook ads, Instagram. I'm just saying, making that up. Like if they don't have it, they're like, I can't train them. I don't have the bandwidth. We don't have that. That candidate will not work.
When do you fire a client?
That's a great question. So I think this is one of the hardest things to do for any business owner is not all clients are good clients, and I think it's really important. So there's a couple things. When client there's some tactical stuff like if I have payment terms. I run a small business. I have to payroll. If you continually, I'll give you one chance early on. If you're late, we'll work it out. But if it becomes a pattern, I can't deal with that. I can't be using my energy to chase you down for payments. Scope creeps, clients that push it too much. I think that clients, especially in the hiring space, that can't make a decision, that lowball candidates, that will literally. Like, let's just say hypothetically, there's a $100,000 budget for a role, and the candidate's looking for 105, 110, and you can't push it for that great candidate, and you would rather continue our search for another 2 months, you're not a good client. Now, I'm getting paid hourly. We're hourly-based consultants. I'm like, fine, fuck it. If you want to keep paying me, I'll keep searching for you. But at the end of the day, that's not a good relationship, and I don't want to interview candidates and put them in a position at a shitty company.
But Adam, do you say that?
Double-edged sword.
Do you have the conversation and go, hey, you know what? I think that
I've had it a couple times.
Okay.
And also there's been times too where a search is going on too long, and as a recruiter why that's happening.
Exactly.
And when to end it. And I'm very proactive sometimes where it's happened in the past where like a search is going on too long, and I will proactively go to a client like, we've been at this a long time. We really feel like we're putting our best foot forward. I think it's in our best interest that we wrap this up at the end of the month. And 9 out of 10 times the client's going to be like, I agree with you on that. And you have to part ways and put your energies elsewhere. You have a finite amount of time and energy.
So many of the executives that I coach are Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and we have this conversation so often. And it's not a scary thing for me anymore. Like, I want it to be the best thing for you too. I want it to be the best experience for you. And clearly we're not clicking. Now, I will say in 88 clients that we had for our previous management consulting firm, I've only had that conversation once or twice, and within 6 months they've come back and they say, hey, you know what?
Boomerang.
Exactly. So I love that you have that conversation. Last question.
It's a terribly hard. First of all, like it's a terribly hard conversation too, especially if your business is doing well and you can financially afford it. It's not a hard conversation. But when you're struggling, it's a tough one because let's just talk about this for a quick second there, because your gut is telling you, hey, I need the money.
Right.
We need to bring in the income. But you're also sucking up the energy to go out and do biz dev and bring in a better client.
Right.
So you have to be willing to take that temporary dip for long-term gain.
But Adam, I'm so glad that you actually stopped me and pulled me back here, because you know what, this is a really important thing. Through the pandemic, everybody knows this. I get the nickname, Dream Killer, or all the other things because there's certain people that I won't coach. And during the pandemic, when the business wasn't at 180% growth, and we were having some big struggles, there were times where I had to take a step back and go, do I really not want to coach Bitcoin executives? I don't know Bitcoin. So how am I going to be able to coach? And they're like, no, Steph, we have experts in Bitcoin. We need leadership skills. We need, connection skills. We need humility skills. We need to figure out how to grow our team.
Soft skills.
Right, the soft skills. And the soft skills are really important. But Adam, as well as I do that you have to be able to understand the technology. You need to understand the industry. You have to so you have to take that step back.
Yeah. You have to have the core requirements.
Exactly.
You have to have the table setters, like table stakes. Like these are baseline things that you need. And every time you see on LinkedIn or wherever, people are like carry character over skill. Caveat: as long as the person has the skills necessary. And no one ever fucking says that. And I'm like, just stop with your clickbaity bullshit. Like let's have a real chat about this, right?
That's awesome. So I want to talk about the POZCast. I was on the show last week, and so I get off the show, and
it'll be airing in early 22.
I don't even care when you do it because it was so fun. Okay, so I go downstairs and I'm pouring drinks and everything. I'm like, my face hurts. Do I have a tooth problem? Like, what's going on? I laughed so hard. You did such incredible research, but overall, Adam, it was so connected and so fun. What's the purpose of the podcast?
So it's interesting. So when I first launched the show, it was because there was an itch I needed to scratch, and I heard a couple of other kind of recruiting HR shows out there, and they just weren't great. And I did a post about this today with Howard Stern. I am the biggest Howard Stern fan my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are when I was 11, 12 years old in Brooklyn, listening to him on the radio, sitting Indian style on my bed, listening to Howard on K-Rock and terrestrial radio. And back then, when it was an old Howard, right? It was an old Howard that was with the porn stars and the strippers and all that kind of stuff there too. But it wasn't until he moved over to satellite radio in 2005, and I actually followed him. I went to work at SIRIUS for 5 years because of Howard. Awesome time. He changed. And that platform where he didn't have to take a commercial break every 16 minutes gave him an unfiltered platform where he could say whatever the hell he wanted for as long as he wanted. And he evolved into being, in my opinion, the best interviewer in the history of broadcasting, because he takes every interview and he turns it into a conversation. But what you don't see, because he's a master conversationalist, but what you don't see behind the scenes is the sheer amount of research and prep that he does. Yes, he has a full team behind him. He's been doing this for 45 years. But Howard, and I know this for a fact firsthand, how much time he takes into his craft and preparing, so that when he has someone on like Hillary Clinton, it's a flawless, seamless conversation, and he could bring out of her the humanity, the humor, the grandmother. The best part of that interview, and I talk about it a lot, was he brought up the love story of Bill and Hillary Clinton in the late 60s, early 70s that no one's ever freaking heard about or talked about. Before they were who they are now, love them or hate them, we'll put that aside. And you're like, holy shit. And so I had this itch, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. I've always kind of wanted to do it. And as they say, the rest is history. And I just loved it out of the gate. And I also knew how to, in my head, from an account management, project management perspective, how to outsource. I knew I didn't want to learn video editing. I didn't want to learn audio editing. I didn't want to spend any of my time on that. And I knew how to outsource. I knew how to use Fiverr and other resources and freelancers to test it out and figure out how to build a show. And it's funny, I look back on it. If you look back at season 1 of The Simpsons, 28 years ago, it's like a child drew it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you look at it, 30 years later, where The Simpsons is now, and it's just an evolution of creative content and just improving.
I'm flabbergasted over two things. The first thing is that you were listening to Howard Stern when you were 11 or 12. That's the first one, which my son will not be listening to this. He
just celebrated 40 years.
He gets in the car and says, Daddy was listening to Howard Stern again, Mommy. So that was first. And then I think the second thing is that The Simpsons have been around for 28 years, and that makes
longer than that. I think it's 30 plus.
I think it's ridiculous. That's so incredible.
You can fact check that after. I'm just throwing a number out there. I mean, it's been on for forever.
So who's your audience? Who's the main listeners?
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't answer your question. So it started out where I really wanted to bring on, and it goes back to my network, right? I mean, I've only had to napalm one professional relationship in my career. I mean, I literally I'm still close and friendly with people that fucking fired me from jobs, right? Like Gary Vaynerchuk is, there for me, sparingly, a couple times a year. But where else do you get fired from a job and you have a better relationship with them afterwards? And that's just kind of my MO. So I really want to dip into my network and showcase real, true HR recruiting people leaders. So that's like the first 10, 15 episodes. And then I started to kind of think about, well, I really like talking about people's careers and going back to the early part, and because no one talks about it. They always talk about the present. What are you doing now? Talk about your book. Talk about what you're doing. But let's go back to that shitty first job you had out of college, or if you didn't, like, what was those early jobs that really laid the foundation? And that was kind of when the whole thing of unpacking the career journey really kind of like played into my head. And no matter what guest I would have on, I would always talk about the early career, the foundations, those lessons learned, and that built in kind of the structure and format of the show. But really the show for me, and this clicked about 40, 50 episodes in, where it really wasn't about me, and the show was never about me. The show is creating a stage, a canvas, where I could showcase and shine a light on others and really bring out the best of them in a way that it's just been a natural thing for me. But the real kind of funny thing was, it was a year and a half ago, one of my buddies is a really good guitar player, and we've had a few drinks. We're hanging out at night, and he's playing guitar and everything, and I'm just mesmerized by him playing. I'm like, holy shit, you're fucking good. And I'm like, dude, you're amazing at this. I mean, like, you're great at this. I mean, I can't sing, I can't dance, I can't DJ, I can't draw, I can't act. Like, I don't even know what my art is. And it's like, dude, he's like, I've listened to a few of your shows. He's like, you are a really good host. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, dude, I'm not trying to just blow smoke up your ass, but like, you drive the conversation, you ask good questions, you keep it moving. He's like, that's your art, man. And I was like, that was tough for me because I don't take compliments well. I've never, first 15 years of my career was just shitted on, and like, I finally found my groove in recruiting. I found my groove with the podcast, and that all gave me such a real, true, authentic confidence that I've never had. And it's really just upped my game in everything that I do.
What's the biggest lesson that you've learned from podcasting?
Well, there's lots of micro lessons, because in every show I ask my guests what's the greatest piece of advice they've ever received, and I ask them what their North Star is. And I've had 200 plus guests and some incredible folks like yourself on, where that's my masterclass. I learned through osmosis. I learned all these lessons. But for me, the biggest lesson I've learned, it's not even a lesson. It's just a continual progression of confidence and self-esteem that I've needed, and it's just grown my business and everything that I do. And it's the law of attraction. You put it out there, and it's all going to come to you.
So when you're doing the podcast, Adam, have you ever had it go the way you didn't want it to go, the way you didn't see it going? And how do you handle that when that happens?
It's only happened a couple times. And listen, there's some guests that are just duds. And it sucks because I really try to close the aperture of who I'm having on. And now I've learned the hard way. So what I do now is if someone pitches me a guest and I'm not familiar with them, before I say yes, I'm going to listen to some past appearances. I'm going to skim through a couple things. And because sometimes it's fucking like pulling teeth, and it's painful. And that's one of the hardest things as a host, is to pull out a good show from a rough guest. Because ultimately, and I say this all the time, and I talk about this in the Poz course that I just put out, ultimately, your responsibility is to the listener.
That's right.
The responsibility to the listener to give them a good show, because otherwise you're going to lose your audience.
Right.
I've ducked a couple of shows.
Right. I mean, I think that's so important to say.
They just didn't make it to air. But, and you know what? The guests never followed up, and it's just out there, and we're all for the better. Because you didn't put out you weren't selfish with your guests, with your audience's time by putting out a shitty show that they had to listen to, and now you're going to lose audiences.
Yes. And you know what? So here's the thing. I think that's so important, because I've had that, and you're literally pulling teeth. It feels like an interview. It feels like a question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. I don't want that. I don't want to put that. I don't want to put the people that have respect for me, that are, having amazing listenership now, that are really starting to trust in me and believe in who I'm researching. I don't want that. I don't want them to, to have to listen to that. So I totally agree with you. What effect has podcasting had on your brand, and also too the people that you actually bring on their brands? Yeah,
I mean, that's the coolest thing. It's the amalgamation. It's the arbitrage, right? Like you have the ability, for example, your audience is going to listen. Some folks might know me through you, through Hala, some other folks that are in our mutual ecosystems. But it's the opportunity to get out there and introduce yourself to a new audience and expand it. And I think that's the greatest thing about podcasting. And that's why I don't think I've ever turned down a guest appearance, right? And I'm really also very generous with new podcasters, because I love it. Because I get a chance to kind of, teach them a couple things along the way, and I'll give them criticism and feedback. Not criticism, sometimes criticism and actionable feedback. And they because people did that with me, right? Like some of the early feedback I got, early on in my show was, Adam, shut the hell up. I mean, I talk a lot less when I'm the host, but like, Shut up and let your guest talk. Stop thinking. We could almost hear you thinking about the next question before you even let the guest finish their current one. And I changed my whole approach. And I worked with my good friend Janny, who's a media coach, and she transformed the format, the flow. We worked so hard on role playing and like questions and like jumping in, how to throw in a 2 or 3 parter, and how to cut somebody off the right way politely. No one does it better than Howard Stern, by the way. I mean, literally, Gary Vaynerchuk did it to fucking Mark Zuckerberg on that, and no one did it better. And looking back on it, people are like, Gary, stop interrupting. But you know what he did? He stopped Zuck from being a freaking robot, and he made him smile and laugh, and he cut him off at the right time. And there was brilliance in that interview. Yeah. I told him that. I saw him a few weeks ago. I told him that. And he's like, and he gave me like the wink. Like he knew that I knew what he was doing.
I think that that's a key thing that you bring up, though. I think that that's so important. I think that whenever I first started, I let the guests talk because I saw it as their platform and I wanted people to know them. But when I'm losing interest, if I'm losing interest, then that means everybody else is losing interest.
Right.
So
right. If I keep my phone down during the show, and it's set on basically sleep mode, so there's only like literally 5 people that it'll ring for a case of emergency. Yeah. I found myself on a couple of those times on the shows going like this.
Oh wow, that's
and I knew immediately that I wasn't into it.
Yeah,
because if I'm into a show, there's nothing I'm looking at except the guest.
Exactly.
And my notes.
Right. So besides podcasting, do you see any other mediums this robust to be able to help push a business or a brand, in different formats?
No, I think podcasting is huge. And here's the deal. It's not for everybody. It's one of those things. Remember a few years back, everyone's like, you need to write an Amazon book. You need to be a bestseller. You need to find the most obscure freaking category. I wrote a book about podcasting, but I'm going to put it into earthworm farming so I could get myself to #1 status, right? And you're like, what the fuck? Like, how the hell did you become a number? Oh, you bought all your books yourself and now you're giving them away, or you're doing the 1-cent audiobook. I'm like, come on. But back then, sorry, that was a rant. It's true. You know exactly what I'm saying. It's so funny. Like, no one cares about your book. It's a shitty book. There's no way you're a #1 bestseller, right? It's ridiculous what people do. But if you have an itch like I had and you want to scratch it and you want to like try something, podcasting is great for yourself, your own personal development. Before we even get into the business side of it, now you talk about the business side of it. I didn't go out with this podcast with the intention of turning it into a business development tool. That happened organically. And that's when the light bulb went off. I'm like, holy shit, I could reach out to people that I admire who are decision makers at companies that I want to do business with, invite them onto the show because now I have a somewhat successful show and they're happy to do so. They wouldn't return my email before this, but now they're happy to come on my show. I engage them. We have conversations. We build relationships. We have the podcast. I follow up with them. And then almost more than half the time they go, hey, Adam, what do you do besides podcasting, right? And then it's a natural, organic pitch.
You're like exotic dancer,
right? Exactly.
Hello?
Or I'll throw a hard pitch.
I mean,
or I'll pitch them, and that is what I built into this ecosystem where the podcast and the business are all one and the same. It's an ecosystem, and that's why the 2 logos here are combined behind me. This is NHP, and that's the POZCast, and they're together. That's the system.
Adam,
in my universe. My planetarium.
Who's your dream guest that you haven't had on yet?
Howard Stern.
What are you waiting on? What are you doing?
What are you doing? So I'm approaching 200 episodes, and I want a insanely large A-list guest. So I'm swinging big, and I have my feelers out on a couple. And I have a couple direct contacts to Howard, and there's a 0.1% chance that he would do it because he doesn't do these things. So I'm trying to figure out an angle. Right? How would I, it's not going to happen, right? Howard's a dream guest. Andy Cohen, who I absolutely love. Andy Cohen is a student of Howard Stern. He's another one who's an absolutely incredible interviewer because Howard's his mentor. Howard, he's been on the show. He's the only person I think could actually not replace Howard, but follow Howard. If there was someone else that was going to do a show like Howard, it would be Andy. And I have direct contacts to Andy, and it's just slow response or no response. It's a tough one, Andy Cohen. But if he's listening... he knows. I've bombarded him enough through direct contacts. Then some weird ones too. Like I'd love to have Mike Tyson on the show. I'm trying to pitch him. Business wise, I'd love to talk to Cuban. I love Mark Cuban. I love his story. I think he's just a real dude.
You just tweet him. He responds to everything.
Yeah.
No, seriously, he does. I'm not kidding. Like he responds to every single thing himself personally.
Yeah, and I have direct contacts there too. So Cuban would be great. Music-wise, I would love to interview Dave Matthews. You know, I've real talk about his career, has paralleled my life. Music-wise, I'd love to talk to Madonna. You know what I mean? Like, there's some really interesting, folks from music that I would love to talk to. It's coming. I'm patient.
You are patient. You are patient.
There's people who have had 5. Look at Jordan Harbinger, who I love.
Jordan's the best. I love him. I adore him.
He's my dude, and he's real with his time. He was another great guest that I had on. I love my conversation with him because he gave me feedback. I asked him for feedback live when we were recording.
Yeah,
because I wanted to give that experience to the listener.
Jordan was my guy for your guitar guy who said you were really, really good. Yeah. Jordan was supposed to be on for 20 minutes, and he gave me an hour. And when we were done, he said, "You are really, really good at this." Mm-hmm. And I was stunned. I was shocked. But when Jordan says that, I'm like, okay, I really need to refocus. I need to really take this super seriously, and I owe it to be the best. So
there you go.
So Adam, you obviously know the show is on obstacles into opportunities, and we like to end the conversation with this question: what is the biggest obstacle that you've faced thus far that you've been able to turn into an opportunity?
I think the biggest obstacle goes back to that day, April 1st, 2015, where I had to make a decision in my career that really affected my life. And the obstacle was, I am now at my lowest. What am I going to do from here? And that was a moment when I had to harness this tenacity that was always inside of me, but it never needed to or had to come out and say, I need to be there and be my best for me so I could be my best for my family. And that was the moment everything changed, when I really took accountability and ownership of my career. And in turn, it really gave me a lot more accountability in my life. And I haven't looked back.
Adam, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for the connection. Thank you for all of the laughs. Where can our listeners find you and learn more about you?
Absolutely. So for any marketing, media, advertising jobs, you can check us out at nhptalentgroup.com. And if you want to check out the show, it is ThePozcast.com. And you can find all of our great episodes there.
Thank you again so much. This has been so much fun.
Awesome. Stephynie, thank you so much. And thanks to our audience for spending the last 51 minutes and 28 seconds with us.
Thank you.